G'day! Welcome to True Blue History. I'm Adam Bloom. Today's special guest is former combat engineer Curtis McGrath. Curtis was serving in Afghanistan in 2012 when he stepped on a landmine and his life changed forever. He has gone on to represent Australia in the Paralympics and is a three-time gold medalist. He won gold in Rio in 2016 and 2 gold medals in Tokyo, and is a 10 times world champion. And he has written a book, Blood, Sweat and Steel, on his life, and he has joined us today to tell his story about his service in the Army and the journey after that fateful day in 2012. Hi Curtis, thanks for joining us on the show.
My pleasure, thank you for having me.
Curtis, no thanks mate, it's an honour and a privilege to have you on the show. So Curtis, can you tell us a bit about you as a young fella? Where did you grow up? What was that like? Have you got any brothers and sisters? And what was school like for you? And what was your interest in sport?
Yeah, I grew up a little bit all over the place. Central Otago in New Zealand was sort of my home sort of location, you could call it. I was born in Dunedin and then moved around in Wanaka and then Christchurch. But then my parents were on a lifestyle change, moved over to Western Australia, and we lived on a big wheat farm. And there I got my Australian citizenship, and I was doing all sorts of different sports at this stage. And then 4 years in, we moved back to Queenstown in New Zealand and continued doing all different sports. Obviously not AFL in New Zealand, but played hockey and netball and rugby and cricket and soccer and all of that. And then with school, I was able to do a subject called outdoor recreation, and that's pretty much like, especially in Queenstown, it's like an outdoor adventure course. In the summer we're kayaking, in the winter we're snowboarding, in the interim seasons, we're hiking and rock climbing and all that sort of thing. So a very sort of outdoorsy thing. And I remember, I think Fridays you only do a half day and then you go off and do whatever activity is in the season. So it's a pretty cool lifestyle. And with all my sport and whatnot, I sort of focused a little bit on rugby and cricket and snowboarding. So I broke my leg, dislocated my ankle at school at playing rugby one time, and sort of took about 12 months off the rugby thing because it really busted me up. It was a good break, broke both bones in my lower leg and twisted my ankle right around backwards and stuff. The typical sort of footy injuries you see. So and then just did snowboarding and got a bit more confidence back and sort of started to enjoy all the other stuff. But with my siblings, I got a little brother. He's 5 years younger than me, and a little sister who's 10 years younger. So there's big gaps there. And as much as we are siblings and we love each other and things like that, there was just big gaps during that time of life. I'm at like the middle of high school and he's in the middle of primary school, and my sister's at daycare. So big gaps there that meant that we didn't socialize in the same sort of way. I'd go out with my friends and he was still at primary school, so that just didn't correlate. So but it meant that I had a bit more of a paternal sort of position, especially for my little sister, making sure that she was all right, making sure that she'd get to and from primary school when she got to age and things like that. So yeah, it was a bit of a move around. And then at the end of school, we all got asked that question, what we want to do with ourselves. And a lot of my friends were heading off to university, and I wasn't really the academic type. And I really loved all the outdoor adventure stuff, and sort of weighed up my options between the New Zealand Defence Force and the Australian Defence Force, because as I said, I wanted to continue on that adventure. And that's when I decided, I'm pretty sure I want to join the Army. So made that decision.
So growing up as a kid in New Zealand and Australia, what was taught about the Anzac legend in school?
Mainly just the obvious sort of Anzac Day, Remembrance Day things, but I always had a fascination with the military and specifically the technology within it. And I think that's what drew me to firstly, that was one of the main things that drew me to the Australian Defence Force. And I remember being at the start of high school over in WA. I got an aviation scholarship for Kent Street High School in Perth, and I wanted to be a fighter pilot, or a jet pilot as a kid and as a young kid. And then I realised that it was a hell of a lot more academic than I realised. But it doesn't mean that I couldn't have a job, within that sort of idea of it all, and thinking about the different things that I wanted to do and what I was interested in. And when it came up at school, we were talking about the Air Force and Army and blah, 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 that, all the aviation components of them. And that was something that I was super interested in. So the Anzac sort of spirit was always present in my education, especially in WA, because there was this real military feel of pathway. But when I moved back to New Zealand, they're incredibly proud, but they are somewhat very humble about their Anzac sort of contributions, or the military contributions. And I think that it has something to do with the way in which they celebrate. They're a lot more sort of, just a little bit smaller in a way. And it just seems like it's something that it hasn't had the revival as it has had here in Australia. So, and that's due to politics and culture and all that sort of thing. But there is a very proud part of the New Zealand military of the Māori contribution, especially in World War One. There's a really amazing photo of them doing the haka. I think it's in front of the Sphinx or the pyramids. And actually that might have been. That's World War II. Sorry, getting them mixed up. But and it is like the contribution that they've thrown in and got involved and been a part of history. And not to say that the Indigenous communities here in Australia haven't, but it's just a picture that I remember quite vividly.
So in the book, you talk about moving out to Australia when you were 10 years old, and you started school and you were told, we speak Australian here, not New Zealand. Looking back now, what was that like for you at a young age coming to a foreign country? Even though it's New Zealand and Australia, it's not that far. How was that for you as a 10-year-old?
I guess an adventure. I was not really sad about leaving, my friends in New Zealand, Christchurch at the time, and that's something that as a 10-year-old you're pretty interested in looking at all the different opportunities that are in front of you, even though you may not see them as that. You're more about the adventure, going on a plane. It's going to be a big flight, especially from New Zealand. It's a bit of a journey, and then moving out to the bush, and that was something that was really. I loved my time living in the bush. It was, we had a PlayStation 1, I think, at the time, and we played that a little bit, but there was just so much on offer, even though it may not seem like that. You're helping dad with checking the fences, or you're going out and doing some time in a tractor or driving a tractor. As an 11-year-old, that's pretty crazy, but these are the things you can do on the farm, and you sort of get this responsibility installed really quickly in you and early. Learning to drive so early, it's just one big adventure, and that's really cool. So the whole we speak Australian here. She's a very old crusty teacher and very set in her ways, and Mrs. Bruce was her name, and great teacher, but very very stoic and stubborn, which is as they all were back then, I guess.
Absolutely, and we in the book you also talk about, so you moved back to New Zealand and you did some work experience with the New Zealand Army. How much of that influence was this in making your decision to join the Australian Army?
It was a little bit in a way, and looking back now, I don't think I talk about this in the book, but that whilst you were at the work experience, it was like a 10-day long sort of camp, and it was all military theme. You get sort of treated like a recruit at times, but then as a student in other ways. And we got the opportunity to choose. We got sort of like this big pamphlet, and it had all the different roles like infantry, cavalry, engineers, fitter armor. There was all these different things. And I remember choosing a combat engineer as one of them and cavalry as another. And I think I picked fitter armor, which is, pretty much a gun mechanic, if those people who don't know what they are. But and just getting opportunity to see what they're doing, all the different tools that they got to play around with. And when I came to the decision, I was talking about the aviation stuff before, I wanted something that was sort of mechanical in a way, and obviously within an aviation stream. And I really enjoyed helicopters. So living in Queenstown, my cousin is a helicopter pilot there, and he, I'd hang out with him when I could, and we'd do these work days to raise money for charity and so on. We'd go work wherever for a day, and I got to work at the at his helicopter company, well, not his, but at the company he was working at, and he sort of like exposed me to how cool a helicopter was, and how amazing those machines were. And I was pretty keen on doing something like that. And I knew I wasn't smart enough to be a pilot, or I haven't applied myself correctly at school, more about snowboarding and having fun. But that sort of meant that I was, looking at other things within aviation. And I started to weigh up, what it was I wanted to do. And I wanted to be something in aviation and probably mechanics. And so I started to look for a helicopter aircraft technician, helicopter mechanic. And in Australia, they in the Australian Army, they have direct entry to helicopters. And in New Zealand, you have to go through the Air Force, and you have to do fixed wing first, and then you get the opportunity to go into helicopters after. And I was like, why would I do that? That's a waste of time. There's a lot more on offer in terms of equipment, deployment opportunities, and your pay was a lot better as well in Australia. So I just made that choice, and after being exposed and having the experience with the work experience with the New Zealand crew, it sort of gave me an insight, but it didn't really set me up for what I ended up choosing.
And you did, so you mentioned that you signed up and you joined as a combat engineer, and you had to overcome a little hurdle before joining. Can you tell us what that little hurdle was with your injury?
Yeah, so I alluded to it before. I broke my leg, dislocated my ankle, playing rugby at school, and I came over and they wanted to do a medical, and they were like a medical check, and then they realized that I had this previous injury, and they wanted to make sure that there was no, I don't know, liability pressed onto the military over here, and I had to go get a check, like from an orthopedic surgeon, and quite literally, I walked in there. He said, "Yeah, cool. Hop on one foot," and I hopped on it, and he's like, "All right, do a like single leg squat. All right, stand up. Yeah, cool, we're done." And walked out, and I remember walking back to the car with mum. Mum was like, "Well, that was the fastest $550 I've spent in my life. Like, that was outrageously stupid." And like, as if a doctor couldn't do that at the recruit training. But these are these are just little prerequisites and things like that. Sometimes you have to do. But yeah, it was a bit of a non-event for something that's actually quite significant for your life. Something you don't actually need to do, but
Absolutely. And so you go to Kapooka, and what did you enjoy the most about basic training at Kapooka, and what did you find the most challenging aspect?
What I reckon I enjoyed the collective group, like all the people I was going through with. We all from all walks of life, and we were all in this together, and we're trying to become soldiers, and it was pretty cool, and we got the opportunity to do all these different things within the military, and as basic training does, you sort of touch on everything, and coming together with the guys and girls in my platoon, and that was really good fun. And then challenges. I don't know. I quite thrived in that environment. I quite enjoyed the whole process. I really liked the I was very fit. I was probably too run fit to get into the army, and I could run all day and love it. And you get in the army, you do bugger all running, and I thought you run everywhere like you see in the movies, but no, you do bugger all, and it's more battle PT. I think was something that I'd never heard of before or experienced, and never even trained in. And battle PT is like doing battle simulation physical activities like leopard crawling and climbing ropes and using your weapon as like a weight, like you hold your arm out straight with holding the gun, and that's like 3.5-4 kilos. So if you do that for long enough and do enough reps of it, it actually does start to hurt. So that was something that probably built up my body strength. And I got conjunctivitis, which was a real pain in the ass whilst I was there. And that was something that I struggled with, because it just ripped through everyone. And I remember being the right marker, which is in drill, when you're marching on a parade square, the right marker is sort of like the point in which everyone dresses themselves off to be flat. And it was something that, I couldn't see. So I was bloody walking in zigzags and getting yelled at and things like that. So it was just one of those things that it was a bit of a shit thing, but that's all right.
What additional training did you have to do after Kapuka to become a combat engineer?
Yeah. So this is the first time we've talked about combat engineering. So as I went through a recruit process, they weren't recruiting aircraft technicians anymore, all for the next 12 to 18 months. And I was 17 and pretty keen on getting in. So what else you got? And they're like, what about combat engineering? Oh, yeah, that sounds pretty good. Let's do that. I'll give it a go. And as I said before, the first time I got exposed to it in the New Zealand work experience. So after basic training, everyone goes away and does IETs, which is initial employment training. So that's it's all sort of specific on the trade or the chosen sort of occupation in which you've chosen. And for me, it was heading off to the School of Military Engineering in Sydney. We spent 3.5 months there doing all things engineering, but always with a touch of what we learned at basic training. So, you do a little bit of drill, you do a little bit of PT, you do a little bit of physical training, I should say, and then do a little bit like infantry minor tactics type thing, which is very, very basic situation, because if every person in the military, in the army, is a soldier first, and then whatever their chosen discipline is second, and that's why they can rely on numbers to fill the trenches, so to say. Engineer training is really cool, and I reckon that's probably when I started to make some really bloody good friends in the military. Basic training, as I said before, all walks of life, we're going off to do all different things, but at engineer training, that you're with these guys for a long time, at least half of them anyway, because they split up and send off to different regiments when we finish. But learning how to use explosives, bridging, water purification, all that sort of thing, like just all these. The great thing about engineering, at the combat engineering, is the role is so broad, but also the worst thing is it's so broad, because you can never keep up with the technology and the movements and the drills and all that sort of stuff with each sort of discipline within it. So the bridging, all the technology changes there all the time, all the water purification, but now desalination plants, it changes all the time, which is really tricky to keep up with. So but yeah.
In the book, you talk about setting your explosives with a fuse of 40 seconds. Can you tell us what happened with this and what you learned from this experience?
So what you're talking about is, so we get in groups of, I think it's 4 or 5 of us, and each person gets a little piece of plastic explosives, and it just looks like white Play-Doh. And then you get a detonator, and then there's a fuse that comes out of it. It's a dark green, sort of looks like a power cord in a way, a bit thick power cord, and it's called an FBT, fuse burn time, and it burns over time. So it's been calculated to have so much gunpowder, so or whatever it is, and it burns to a set speed. And so we cut it to it, so it's like 40 seconds long. And I'm last on second last on the group. I think I'm last, and the first person goes, and then he gets his lit, and he's put it down and stepped back, and we're all in this bunker, sort of like in this big sort of berm, kind of like an empty dam, like just a standard farm dam, and we're in this bunker, and as it's burning down, the other people have got to light theirs, and the second person just couldn't get theirs lit, and the clocks are ticking, and I think the instructors were pretty keen on making it a bit exciting, because that much explosives it's incredibly dangerous if you're very close to it, but it probably wasn't going to do too much if we were, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 meters away. Yeah, you might get covered in dirt, you might get a bit of shrapnel from something in the ground, but not too bad really. But yeah, and it's ticking away. It's probably like, I don't know, like 12 seconds left, and then he finally gets his done, and then there's still 2 more people to go, and we're like trying to light it, and then we managed to get them done first pop, and we sort of run out, and all of that took. We're only doing one at a time, so we're not all together. So that's what made it interesting. And then we were like, and then the drill instructor's like, get out, and we run out of the bunker. And it's probably like I turned the corner, or the actually drill instructor was the last one out, and he turned the corner just behind me, and like it went off bang. So that was a bit exciting and whatnot. But yeah, just one of those little stories that happens in the army.
And I suppose for you, Curtis, it's a lesson in how people are calm under pressure, and some aren't calm under pressure when they're faced with that situation.
Yeah, that's right. And that's going back to your question. Yeah, it's all about like focusing on the task right in front of you and not getting distracted or being influenced by outside pressure. And that can be laid on any element of life and be interesting and applicable to many things. But the whole dealing with explosives makes it just a little bit weightier. But yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, life and death, situations, they bring out the best in people, that's for sure. So after the School of Military Engineering, you were posted to Darwin as part of the 1st Combat Engineer Regiment. How did you feel after completing all your training, and now you were called a sapper? And for the people who aren't aware, what is a sapper?
So sapper is an engineer equivalent of a private, or combat engineer equivalent of private, which is the lowest rank in the army, minus recruit or trainee. And it is a word that's come from like medieval times, from when they used to use tunnels to sap walls. So sap meaning to bring down. And that, so the engineers back in the day used to build, siege equipment like catapults and stuff, and they also used to do holes under the walls of castles to bring them down, and the fires under them that would heat up the dirt and eventually they use explosives to bring down walls, and that's where the term sapper comes from. But yeah, it's just a word in which you're very proud to receive, because it means that you've completed your training and you're ready for the next step. So it was pretty cool.
So what's a standard day for a combat engineer like?
It all depends on what you're up to or where you're at. If we're out on exercise, it can be a whole range of things. But in base, on base, it's pretty mundane. You're usually getting tools and equipment ready to go out on exercise or deployment, and you spend a lot of time doing this, like excessive amounts of doing this, and you might do something like sharpening an axe, for instance, 8-9 times in a month. Like, it's just outrageous. Like, it's stupid how much we have to maintain the tools, especially hand tools. Like hand tools meaning like shovels and axes and picks and things like that. It's just That's just one of the nuances of that role. But then, getting other equipment like the troop carriers, the armored APCs ready and maintaining them, and the vehicles all sorted, and helping the other parts of our regiment, the Q store, which is the quartermaster's store, so the storeroom pretty much with all that extra stuff, catalog, all that stuff, and different departments have different specialties. So like there's a bridging department, all that sort of thing. So helping them out and blah blah blah. So it was a pretty mundane sort of time. And then every now and then you'd throw in some training. You do PT in the morning, obviously. Then you go away, have breakfast, and then you'd come back and do that maintenance stuff, and then pretty much, and then you might do like a lesson or something like that, or some training in the afternoon, or the other way around, and then you knock off about 4 o'clock. So the hours aren't hard on base, and it's quite easy, but just monotonous and boring.
Can you share with us what your first training exercise to Malaysia was like, and what did you take away from this experience?
So Malaysia, I went on Rifle Company Butterworth, which is an infantry minor tactics sort of training trip, and we were like RCB 81, so there was 81 versions of this, people going over for 81, and you probably do 2 or 3 a year. So it's been going for many years, and it's all to do with learning how to operate in the jungle. It's a jungle training course in a way. I wouldn't say it's not like a special forces one. It's not necessarily like that, but it's learning infantry tactics in the jungle, because in Australia we do have the jungle, like Tully, and there's a bit in Kanunga and things like that. But I think Australia is quite well known for its ability to fight in the jungle with Kokoda and the Borneo and the Malaysian conflicts, things like that, and obviously then Vietnam later on. And all of that was something that I think it's a tradition that they want to uphold. And I hate to say it, but I bloody hated it. It was horrific. It was physically one of the hardest things I've ever had to do in my life. It was it's sort of something you don't want to ever have to do unless you absolutely have to. And back in World War II in Vietnam, it was you have to do it, because the threat of Australia was Japan coming into Australia, and obviously the communist situation in Vietnam was very different then. But just as a training environment, it's horrific. It's hot, it's super wet, you have to carry everything, it's mountainous, it's muddy, the bugs are massive, everything, the plants have got spikes everywhere. It's a pretty rough environment. And there was one exercise we did on this trip where we went in. It was meant to be like a 7-day exercise. We're in Brunei at this time, in Borneo Island, and there was 32 of us engineers went in, and only like eight or nine were still sort of physically able to do the exercise at the end. It was a very difficult thing. People were just tripping over, and it took us like 7 hours to go 2Ks and things like that. It was just outrageously hard.
So what did you take away from that? Did you find out that you could push your body further than what you had before, or?
Yeah, definitely. Like, as I said, it was like physically the hardest thing I've ever had to do. The ability to sort of suffer in a way, in a it's quite a safe way. It's a training environment, and thankfully, I would never ever want to fight in the jungle ever. Like it was horrific, and I would like to say I fought in the desert, and it was quite a different environment. Like we wouldn't, but it's just so much harder. Like everything was hard, and just the ability to sort of suck up and get on with it was something, that sort of resilience, that perseverance. So that was something that, but also it's sort of hard, like opened my eyes to the ability that the attrition rate of working in there was pretty rough, and it wasn't it was was something that you had to take a very serious approach to.
Absolutely. And so you come back from Malaysia, and can you share with us what your first deployment to East Timor was like? And you almost didn't make this deployment.
Yeah, East Timor. That was, so we got back from Malaysia, had like a couple months off, and then refit to fight and all that sort of stuff. And then there was this big rotations of deployments coming out of 1 Brigade, which is the big base up in Darwin, and our regiment was sending people over. So over to Iraq, Afghanistan, and East Timor, and we got the East Timor trip. In the lead up, we get sort of pre-deployment leave. And I was playing rugby when I shouldn't have in New Zealand with my mates, and I got tackled and tore the AC ligaments in my shoulder. And it was about a month, until we deployed. So I almost missed the deployment based on my physical ability to do the tests. And I remember we had to do a basic fitness test just to sort of certify that we were fit to go. And I don't know, maybe it was like a week before, and that was sort of my target. I was going to get fit and strong enough in my shoulder to get on this deployment. I just did the basic minimum of push-ups. That was the only one that was going to hurt me. So I did my 40 push-ups in pain and got it done. And then the run and the sit-ups are not shoulder orientated. So but made the cut and got on the plane, so it was good.
What was the most rewarding aspect of that deployment, and what were your thoughts of the local people?
Yeah, East Timor was my favourite thing I did in the army. I reckon we were very well accepted by the locals. We were over there building water tanks for orphanages, medical centres for remote communities, fixing roads and fixing bridges and things like that. So it was very, very, very much a humanitarian mission for our part as engineers. But we just felt like we made a difference there, and it was something that I look back on and super happy that I got the opportunity to do that. It was a really, really rewarding deployment, and as I said, like, we were well accepted there, and we made I felt like we made a difference to the people themselves. Whereas it's very, very different when it's in a warlike situation. It's so much harder to do anything. But even though we're carrying body armor and rifles, it was just one of those things you as a deterrent, as opposed to actually protecting yourself from getting shot. So yeah.
In the book, you talk about the 4-year itch. How close for you were you in thinking about leaving the army after your 4 years of service?
Yeah, so as a non-technical trade, meaning that it's not like a mechanic or a aircraft technician, our minimum return of service is 4 years. So you do 4 years, and then you have the choice to leave if you want. Other trades have to go longer. Officers obviously get a little bit longer because they're at universities and stuff that they get given the university courses. And a lot of my friends were not that keen, but there is a definite sort of line in the sand when it gets drawn, and you then have the opportunity to leave if you want. And some guys do, but they're just not necessarily cut out for it, or not cut out, that's probably the wrong word. They didn't find the rewards they were looking for within the military, and so they move on to different bigger and better things maybe. And then for myself, I was pretty keen to look at something else in my life, and I was pretty keen to maybe pursue something different. And then a little thing came up at knockoff points one day in the afternoon when we knock off. The boss comes out and gives us a bit of a spew about what's happening and what's coming up, and if there's any courses on offer and whatnot. And my boss said, "Oh, there's a posting down to Brisbane at 21 Construction Squadron next year if anyone wants it." And I was like, "Oh, I'll take that. Brisbane's bloody good place to be posted." There's not, unless you're like drinking heaps and fishing. Darwin's not really the place where you want to be. But don't get me wrong, like the regiment was really good up there, but Brisbane, obviously big city, and I was a bit closer to my family and New Zealand as well, which is where I would pretty much go on holiday every time. So it was a sort of an easy, not easy, but it was a simple choice for me. And then, got posted down 2010 to Brisbane, which was pretty cool.
So you mentioned you got posted down to Brisbane in 2010 to 21 construction unit. What is their role in the army?
Yeah, so up in Darwin, I was at a combat engineer regiment, which means they were very combat orientated, whereas the construction squadron, as it says, it stands out, the construction. So they do large scale construction, so the massive infrastructure pieces like large roads and like town halls and things like that, communities, dams, all that sort of thing. They've got a lot of plant specialists, they've got a lot of trade specialists, they've got a very small contingent of combat engineers, and that's where I was. But I also had driving qualifications, so I was in the transport troop, so we're doing all the driving and things like that, so and moving and hauling things around. So that was something that we did, and that's what the difference really is. So yeah.
So in the book, you talk about the moment you found out that 2 Australian soldiers had been killed in Afghanistan. Sappers Darren Smith, aged 25, and Jacob Moreland, aged 21. You knew Darren well. How did you deal with the loss of a mate? And looking back now and writing it in the book, have you dealt with it since?
I was on an exercise, or not an exercise, it's sort of like a pseudo deployment. We do these things called ACAP, just like a Army Aboriginal Assistance Program. We go out and build infrastructure projects for remote communities, and we're out there. I remember it came on the news, and when I realized who it was, it didn't shock me in a way. I was just, well, maybe it did. I wasn't surprised, but maybe I was mentally or emotionally shocked by it. It was, we knew that there was dangers, and Afghanistan was a pretty rough place at the time, and but it never really seemed like it was a reality, if that makes sense. I was so far removed from it that it was difficult to comprehend the actual situation of not ever seeing him again. I didn't know Jacob at all, but I knew Smithy pretty well. Well, not pretty well. I went around to his house for a couple of barbecues and stuff, and he's an amazing dude that you try to think about, could it happen to a nicer bloke type thing, and the answer is probably not. But yeah, at the same time, that's the role, and that's the tricky things of, or not tricky, but the dangers of being a combat engineer in Afghanistan. And it is an incredibly dangerous job.
Absolutely. And you talk in the book about that you wanted to go to Afghanistan. Why was that?
So a lot of my friends from especially one CER were headed off to Afghanistan a little bit after Smithy got killed, and so that was so MTF, the multi MTF, yeah, man, I can't even remember what that means. Yeah, so something multi-task force, something like that. Mentoring task force, that's what it is, mentoring task force. MTF 1, that was Smithy's trip, and then MTF 2 is the 1st Combat Engineers Regiment. They were sort of, they were next. So, and a lot of my mates were heading over, and I lost a few more friends that way, and obviously it might want to deter you to go there, but I was very much of the opinion that I was trained to do that job. So I was trained to do that job, and I had not got my opportunity to utilize my skills as much in a combat situation. I got the opportunity to do all the humanitarian stuff and was continuing to do that. But I was very keen to have the opportunity to go to Afghanistan and hopefully get my chance to use those skills.
And yeah, as you say, it's for an infantryman. It's to apply their craft and do what they're trained to do. So I can see why the drive was there to go and apply your trade that you'd spent so long perfecting.
Yeah, and I relate it to being on a sports team, whether that's netball, hockey, or rugby, or cricket, or whatever. And you're training and training and training, and you go to the games and you sit on the bench and watch your mates go out and do the job they've been trained to do, and you just sit there and watch. And you really want to be out in that field and give yourself a test, give it a run through. So that's sort of the analogy that I'm using.
Absolutely. So let's talk about the sliding doors moment for you and your upcoming. So you are deployed to Afghanistan, and what training and pre-deployment training did you have to do in order to go to Afghanistan?
It is a long process. Obviously, you're doing all your training in the meantime when you're out on like exercise, doing other exercise things like water purification. You're still doing that training situation to be in a warlike scenario. So you do a lot. You do many different exercises. You're doing specifically for Afghanistan. You're going there as a high-risk search technician. So you're looking for IEDs. You're searching the ground, searching buildings, searching vehicles, searching roads, searching all sorts of different things, berms and aqueducts, and the list is massive. But you're getting taught how they're constructed, what they're made out of, sort of the local interaction, cultural differences. You're also learning to do different radio techniques and things, and then doing what else? Like for me, I was combat first aid trained, so I was doing sort of more combat scenario training and whatnot. So yeah, that and for the search stuff, as I said before, it's considered one of the most dangerous roles in Afghanistan. So a combat engineer is one of the only professions that gets certified to deploy. We have, because our role's so incredibly difficult and dangerous, obviously you want somebody of a certain standard to deploy, and that's why we get certified. So it's very, very difficult, very long, very hot, and all the rest. It's a pretty tricky job.
Absolutely. So whilst you were still on your pre-deployment training, another 2 combat engineers had been killed in February 2011 whilst serving in Afghanistan for the 1st Combat Engineers Regiment. Richard Atkins, aged 22, had been killed by an IED blast, and Jamie Larkham, aged 21, had been killed in a firefight. You knew them both. How did their deaths affect you and everyone else on the course?
Yeah, I actually little bit of an error there, but I was not on my pre-deployment at that time. I was on leave just before I came back, and it was again, I knew them, but I didn't know them that well. They great blokes and super funny and everything, but it's, again, just like Smithy, it was sort of more of a realization that what we were doing is incredibly dangerous, and you had to pay attention to what you were doing all the time. Obviously, Larkham's death as a firefight, and that's a whole different kettle of fish rather than looking for IEDs, and it was just one of those things. And it was difficult because I knew people that were around them when they got hurt or killed, and I knew that the effects that had on, I didn't know, but I empathized the effects that was having on them as well. And so you sort of question, how would I react in that situation, and what would I do, and what would I do in that situation? So all of that sort of starts seed growing in your mind about all those situations. So it does prepare you for something to happen in the future that may maybe something like that. So it is. I'm not too sure how it affected everyone else, but yeah, it's just, I guess it's hard to measure.
Absolutely. And for you, because you were in preparation for your deployment, what thoughts crossed your mind that you could be seriously injured or worse, pay the ultimate sacrifice? And how did you suppress these feelings?
Yeah, it's just a matter of knowing or having confidence in your training, having confidence in your ability to execute the task and do it as safely and as hopefully in a whole manner, right? Like, so, are we safe to move through that area without getting shot at? Are we safe to move through that area because the ground's been searched? All these different things that come into account. But a lot of it's so much out of your control. There's certain things that you are able to do and can't do, but at the same time, it's all a matter of your capability and doing your job as best you can, and that's how you sort of comprehend it, or having the feelings overwhelm you. You just focus on what you can control and do them the best you can.
So, in the book, your future wife, Rachel, she asked you a question that came out of the blue, and she said, "What happens if you lose your legs a week out from going to Afghanistan?" And what was your reply to that question?
I just said I'd just go to the Paralympics or something, and I will figure it out and have a bit of a laugh. And it was, passing comment that is something that some people are more traumatized by that question than. But as I said before, I was more worried about just doing my job and doing it as best I could. So yeah.
So, for you to say that statement, had you previously had an interest in the Olympics, or was it like to be a participate as an athlete? What was?
No, not really. I enjoyed sport and all the different types of sport that the Olympics displayed and the Paralympics. And I wasn't really aware of the Paralympic movement so much. It was something that I knew of, but I hadn't really looked into or been interested in. Even the Olympics level. Like I did a bit of swimming at high school and whatnot, but I didn't see it as like an avenue for me to go to the Olympics. It was just something that I enjoyed and liked to watch, and did a few school projects on a few athletes when I was young, and that sort of thing. So it wasn't anything that I was destined to do or wanted to do either.
So you deployed to Afghanistan, and what were your first impressions of the country once you had boots on the ground, and what were your thoughts of the local people?
Afghanistan was incredibly beautiful. Big mountains, big green veins of life running through the valleys, which where all the life and the people and the crops grow and so on and so forth. It's a country that it's been scarred by war. There was remnants of Russian tanks and riverbeds and on the side of the roads and things like that. So you could see that it had been through a bit of rough patch and still was going through it. And but the people were always pretty welcoming and happy to have us in the area, because they knew that there was stability and security around, and that was us, and it was our display of our sort of indirect sort of by just being there. So it was like I said, incredibly beautiful. It didn't really give us the first sense of danger initially. We'd been told that there's going to be gunfights on every corner, but in reality, it was a lot of smiling kids and a lot of farmers, and that was pretty much it. Really, it was a bit of a not a surprise, but it was just like, oh, okay, maybe it's not as bad as what they say it is.
So we talked earlier on. Can you tell us about the 23rd of August 2012 and the lead up to that day and how it changed your life?
23rd. We were on a patrol in a remote corner of the Uruzgan province, near in Uruzgan, and it was near a base called Patrol Base Anaconda. It was that was being occupied by American Special Forces Green Berets at the time. And our role was to go up and re-establish a checkpoint. And by re-establishing a checkpoint, I mean that there is a checkpoint there, and the insurgents in the area pushed out the police and the army, and using IEDs and gun battles and whatnot. And it meant that we would go back into an area which had been previously and knowingly occupied by the enemy. And obviously that would mean that the dangers would be a lot higher, especially for IEDs. We had a lot of reports that there was a lot of IED activity in that area, and the amount of IEDs was clearly evident when we first sort of got within, I don't know, maybe a kilometre of the checkpoint, because there was just blast craters everywhere and all that sort of thing. So as we were moving in, we realised that there was a lot of IEDs around, and we started to find a few, got rid of them through a process of getting the EOD techs, the guys in the bomb suits, explosive ordnance disposal team come out, they disarm, or most of the time they'll blow them in place. So just putting a little bit of explosives and then blowing them out, and then moving forward. And then from there, we sort of pushed up onto the checkpoint, and we realised there was a very large boulder blocking the main road. So we had to find another way around, and got up onto the checkpoint and realised that there was just so much metal everywhere. Like the insurgents knew that people used metal detectors to find IEDs, so they were just sprinkling little bits of wire clippings and Coke can tabs, and just rubbish, absolute rubbish everywhere. And it was pretty tricky to move because of that. Every time you find something metal in the ground, you get the hint if it could be an IED, and because we've been finding them, we were pretty much on edge the whole time. So we had to make sure that we were finding a little bit of metal, putting it in our pocket and searching over it again to make sure that there was nothing under it. So, and that's slowed us right down. I should point out that we're working at like 3,000 meters above sea level. We got probably 20-30 kilos worth of kit on us, including our metal detector and rifle. It's like 40 odd degrees, working about 14-hour days, and maybe dehydration sets in as well. We do have water on us, obviously, but it's one of those things that you don't always make a priority on at all. And on the 23rd of August was the 4th day of our patrol, and we got approval to explosively remove the boulder that was blocking the main drag. And because we had Afghan forces with us, we wanted to help them have access to this area, and easy access. So it was hot, hard, long hours, and I was just a little bit confused about what boulder we were talking about, and I just went to the wrong one, and sitting there waiting for my mate to come to me. The patrol to come to me so we could get rid of this rock. And it's probably like the size of a Volkswagen Beetle or something like that, on its side, and made it pretty tricky. But so we're just blowing it in half or in pieces, and we'll just push it to the side. So that was the trick. But as I said, I went to the wrong boulder, and I'm sitting there waiting, and my mate Pitch comes over to me and he says, "What are you doing?" I thought this was the rock. No, it's the other one. I was like, "Oh, okay, cool." So I pick up my stuff. We'd already searched through this area, so walking through it freely, and along the path, and then probably, I don't know, maybe 10 seconds after I've walked off, Pitch is about 10 meters behind me, and and all of a sudden, like, I'm laying on the flat of my back, looking up at the sky, going, "What the hell? Like, what just happened? There's rocks and shit and all sorts of crap falling, and what the hell just happened?" And I sort of get up on my elbows and look around, and I can see that there's a blast crater next to me. There's blood spraying out my legs. There's bits of metal detector everywhere. My rifle's off to the right hand side, and then 2-piece, 3 pieces, or whatever it is. And I'm, and then, like, as I see my legs, I obviously knew what had happened, and I stood right on an IED, and it went off. So it's one that I myself missed, and unfortunately that was the result. And it was an incredible amount of pain. And a lot of people think, trauma that big, or that much trauma, you don't have any pain. And I was like, well, I felt everything. So it was a very painful experience, but at the same time, a yeah, just shocking in a way, and not just for myself, but other people as well that were there.
So you're medevaced, and obviously your mates come to your aid and save your life, and you're medevaced to hospital. And can you tell us your first thoughts were when waking up in hospital and knowing that your legs had now gone?
Yeah, I knew they were gone before that, and like when I was on the ground and having the first aid done on me and whatnot, and it was something that I knew that they were not coming back because there was nothing left of them, and it was I felt guilty. I felt it was kind of my fault. I missed the IED, and then I stepped on the it and caused not just for myself. Obviously, I've caused it for myself. Not 100%, but in a way, I felt a little bit guilty. It was my fault that I'd caused so much sort of trauma to other people, and I'd made life very difficult for other people. So that was something that I had to come to terms with and be I don't know, try and process it. But it didn't take it wasn't just a waking moment. It was more like a drawn out process over many days.
So you arrive in hospital, and obviously you had to have operations. And what was this part of the first process of your recovery like?
Yeah, lots of operations. There was a lot of sort of cleaning out the wounds, a lot of reconstructive surgery, especially on my left hand. I had a lot of damage done there, a bit of skin grafting and whatnot on my wrist. It's a lot of broken bones in there, so they were all sort of being fused and fixed and whatnot. So, and then and then like once I finally got the skin grafting done onto my thigh, that was something that sort of ended my treatment, and that meant that I was now on the recovery phase. It was, and not rehab yet, but the recovery. So the healing, just waiting for my skin to heal, waiting for my all the wounds to close up so I could get fitted for prosthetics. But in that time I started in a way, so it was just like sort of nice little transfer of into rehab, and doing physio was something that was super important. And I knew, after breaking my leg, that physio was really important to get back, the movements, get strong enough, and all that sort of thing. So that was something that was really important. I had to work really hard, and by the time I got at the end of physio, end of hospital, I was doing like 9 hours a day, and that was pushing me and driving me to be better and stronger, to try and get fitted for prosthetics as soon as I could.
How important was Rachel and your family in your recovery?
Yeah, super important. There's a lot of times, where I was feeling pretty down and out, and they always found a way to cheer me up, or made me focus on what I did have rather than what I don't. And being so severely injured meant that I didn't understand what was next. I didn't understand who I'd become, and they sort of made me feel like I was still Curtis. I was still able to do things and do certain activities, and not literally at that stage, but like very emotional support, and that all that mental support, and obviously made me feel very loved. And I was very happy. Well, not happy. I felt very supported, and I felt very like I could talk to people, and it was super important in that part of my rehab, for sure.
That was part one of a 2-part episode with Curtis McGrath. Come back next week and hear part 2 of Curtis's inspirational story. lest we forget all those who've made the ultimate sacrifice for our country, and thank you to all our defence personnel who have served our country.